The silence in my room was a physical thing, a thick velvet blanket woven from 1,000 other, smaller silences. There was the hush of the heavy damask curtains that smothered the morning light. I couldn't see, but could feel as a distant, impotent warmth on the far side of the room. There was the profound quiet of the Aubusson carpet, a sea of wool that drank the sound of my own footsteps, rendering me a ghost in my own home. My father, Alessandro Rossi, believed that wealth could buy silence, and in this, he had succeeded. He had purchased a world so quiet it screamed. My fingers traced the familiar, intricate paths of the lace on my bedspread, a map of my gilded cage I had memorized through touch alone. Each knot, each delicate loop was a day, a week, a year of my life spent in this beautiful, soundless prison. My world was one of textures and scents. It was the cool, smooth slide of polished mahogany under my fingertips as I navigated the hallway. It was the crisp, almost sharp scent of the lilies my father insisted be kept fresh in the grand foyer, their funereal perfume a constant reminder of a life unlived. It was the distant, muffled clang of a pot from the kitchen, a sound that traveled through layers of plaster and wood, to reach me as a mere echo of activity, of a world that moved and breathed without me. People called me the mafia boss's blind daughter. They said it in whispers I was never meant to hear, but always did, my other senses having grown sharp and predatory in the absence of one. The words were a brand, a title that erased Serafina and left only a frightening, pitiable caricature. People feared my father, and by extension, they feared the strange, broken thing he kept hidden away. A new sound broke the morning's oppressive stillness. Footsteps, unfamiliar. They were heavier than the soft-soled slippers of the maids, more deliberate than the near-silent tread of Rocco, my father's most trusted man and my long-time shadow. Rocco walked as if he were apologizing to the air for disturbing it. These new footsteps were different. They were firm, measured, each one landing with a quiet confidence that spoke not of apology, but of purpose. They came down the hall, stopped outside my door. There was no tentative cough, no shuffling of feet, just a solid, waiting presence. Then, a knock. Not the feather-light tap I was used to, the kind that suggested the knocker was afraid the door might shatter. This was a proper knock. 2 solid raps against the heavy oak. "Miss Rossi," a voice said. The sound vibrated through the wood, a low, resonant baritone that seemed to settle deep in my chest. It was a voice like rough-spun silk, textured and strong. It held no pity, no fear, just a simple, declarative statement of my name. I stood, my hand smoothing down the silk of my robe. "Yes?" My own voice sounded thin and reedy in the quiet, the voice of a ghost. "My name is Julian. I am your new bodyguard. Your father has asked me to escort you down for breakfast." New. The word hung in the air. Bodyguards came and went. Most lasted a few weeks, unnerved by the silence, by me. They spoke to the air over my head, directed questions to Rocco, treated me like a piece of sentient, fragile furniture. They were a constant, rotating reminder of my own helplessness. I walked to the door, my hand finding the cool brass of the knob with practiced ease. I opened it. I couldn't see him, of course, but I could feel the space he occupied. He was tall. I had to tilt my head back slightly to speak in his general direction. I could smell the clean, sharp scent of soap and freshly laundered cotton, a stark contrast to the cloying sweetness of the house's flowers. "The last one quit, then?" I asked, a bitter edge to my tone I couldn't quite hide. "I am not concerned with the last one. he replied, his voice unwavering. My concern is you. May I? I felt a gentle touch on my right hand. He hadn't grabbed my arm or hovered, his hand uncertainly near my elbow as others did. He had lightly touched my fingers, a silent question. Then he offered his forearm. The gesture was so simple, so normal, it was breathtaking. It was an invitation, not a command. It treated me not as a package to be delivered, but as a person to be escorted. My fingers curled hesitantly around his arm. The fabric of his suit jacket was fine wool, but beneath it, his forearm was solid as a rock. It was a point of anchor in my nebulous world, a solid, grounding presence. The hallway is 32 paces to the top of the grand staircase, I said, a little test. The third floorboard from the left on the landing creaks. I am aware, he said, and I could hear the faint hint of a smile in his voice. I walked it this morning. He had done his homework. He took a step, and I moved with him, my body instinctively matching his steady, unhurried rhythm. He didn't pull me or push me. He simply moved, and his arm was a clear, confident guide that my body trusted before my mind did. Your father is in the dining room. He is meeting with the accountants. The mood is tense. The scent of stale coffee is overwhelming. I stopped. My hand tightened on his arm. He hadn't just stated a fact. He had painted a picture. He had translated the visual cues he was seeing into a language I could understand. Mood, scent, no one had ever done that before. They would say, "Your father is busy," and leave it at that. Julian had given me information, context. He had given me a piece of the world beyond my own immediate senses. Tense how? I asked, my curiosity piqued. 2 of the 3 men have sweat on their brows, despite the air being cool. Your father has not touched his espresso. It is sitting on the table, and the steam has stopped rising, he described. He is tapping his little finger on the arm of his chair. The rhythm is fast, like a trapped bird's wing. I knew that tap. It meant my father was on the verge of losing his temper. It meant someone was about to have a very, very bad day. Julian's description was so precise, so vivid, that I could picture the scene perfectly in my mind's eye. The dark, polished table, the white porcelain cup, my father's imposing figure, coiled with irritation. For the first time, I felt like I was approaching a room, not as a blind girl stumbling into a situation, but as an informed participant. Thank you, Julian, I said, and the words were not a formality. They were sincere. It is my job to be your eyes, Miss Rossi, he said simply. That means telling you what I see. We reached the top of the stairs. I knew every one of the 42 marble steps, knew the slight dip in the 10th one, the way the air grew colder as you descended into the cavernous 2-story foyer. But as we began to walk down, Julian spoke again, his voice low, and for my ears only. The morning sun is coming through the large arched window at the front of the house, he began. It's hitting the crystal chandelier, and it's throwing 1,000 tiny rainbows all over the walls. They look like scattered jewels, dancing on the white marble. There's a particularly bright one, a deep, brilliant blue, moving across the portrait of your grandmother. I clutched his arm, my breath catching in my throat. Rainbows. I had a vague, clinical understanding of what they were, a prism of light, but scattered jewels. Dancing on the marble that was poetry. That was magic. He was giving me not just sight, but insight. He was translating the physics of light into the language of beauty. I imagined the little blue jewel, a sapphire spark, gracing the cheek of the woman in the painting, a woman I knew only from my father's stories, and the feel of the thick, textured oil paint on the canvas. As we reached the bottom, the scent of lilies and lemon polish was thick in the air. But for once, it wasn't the only thing I was concentrating on. I was still picturing the dancing light, the world Julian was painting for me with his words. He had been with me for less than 10 minutes, and already the house felt different. It was no longer just a collection of familiar textures and smells. It was a place where rainbows could dance on the walls. Our days fell into a new rhythm, dictated not by the chiming of the grandfather clock in the hall, but by Julian's descriptions. He was a constant, solid presence at my side, his arm a permanent anchor. He didn't just guard my body, he engaged my mind. He broke the suffocating silence my father had so carefully constructed. The gilded cage was still a cage, but Julian was teaching me to see the gold. "This is a painting of a Venetian canal," he would say as we walked past a massive canvas in the West Wing gallery. Others had told me that. Julian did more. "Imagine a street made of shimmering dark green water, long, slender black boats, like the crescent moon, glide on its surface. The buildings on either side are old, their plaster painted in faded shades of rose and gold, and they lean toward each other as if sharing a secret. The artist has captured the moment just as the sun is setting, so the light is thick and golden, like honey, and it makes the water glow from within." I would stand there, my hand on his arm, and listen. I would build the scene in my mind, piece by piece. The feel of the cool, damp air coming off the water, the gentle rocking of the boat, the warmth of the last rays of sun on my face. He gave me the pieces, and my imagination did the rest. He was teaching me to see, not with my eyes, but with my whole being. One afternoon, he led me not through the house, but out the large French doors of the solarium and into the gardens. I usually hated the gardens. To me, they were a disorienting, chaotic space. The ground was uneven. The scents of a dozen different flowers mingled into a confusing perfume, and the buzzing of insects was a constant, unseen threat. I preferred the predictable geometry of the house. "I know you do not like it out here," Julian said, his voice calm, "but I want to show you something. Trust me. Trust." It was a word I did not use lightly. My trust had always been a conditional, fragile thing, but with Julian, it felt different. It felt as solid as the arm I held. "All right," I whispered. He led me along a stone path. "We are walking between 2 long beds of roses," he said. "The ones on your left are a deep, velvety red, the color of a fine wine. The ones on your right are a delicate, creamy white. Can you smell the difference?" I paused, inhaling deeply. I had always just smelled roses. But now, I focused. The scent from the left was rich, heavy, with an almost spicy undertone. The one from the right was lighter, sweeter, with a hint of citrus. "The red ones smell darker," I said, feeling foolish. "Exactly," Julian said, and the warmth in his voice made me feel anything but foolish. "They do. Now, reach out your hand, gently." He guided my hand toward one of the red roses. "Be careful of the thorns. Feel the petal. It's thick, almost like velvet. That's why the color is so deep." My fingers brushed against the petal. It was exactly as he'd described. Thick, soft, luxurious. Then he guided my hand to a white rose. "Now this one. The petals are thinner, more delicate, almost like tissue paper." They were. The difference was immediate, tangible. I had lived in this house for 22 years, and for the first time, I understood the difference between a red rose and a white one. A bee buzzed Suddenly near my ear, a loud, angry sound. I flinched violently, pulling my hand back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The unseen was always the most terrifying. Julian didn't move. His arm remained steady, a bulwark. "It is just a honeybee," he said, his voice a low murmur. "It is fat and fuzzy, with faint yellow stripes. It is more interested in the pollen than in you. It is hovering over a white rose. Now, its wings are beating so fast, they are just a blur. Now it has landed. It is crawling inside the flower. See? It is gone." His description was so calm, so clinical yet fascinating, that my fear subsided, replaced by a sense of wonder. He hadn't dismissed my fear or told me not to be silly. He had faced it with me, armed me with knowledge, and watched it pass. He had taken a moment of pure panic and turned it into a lesson. In his world, a bee was not a monster in the dark. It was just a bee, fat and fuzzy. "How do you know all this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "About the petals, the bees, the light?" He was silent for a moment. The garden sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of a bird seemed to grow louder in the pause. "Before this," he finally said, "I was in the army, special reconnaissance. My job was to sit, sometimes for days, and just watch, to notice every detail. The way a shadow moves, the number of birds on a wire, the color of the dirt. My life, and the lives of the men with me, depended on seeing what others missed. I tried to imagine it. This calm, steady man, hidden somewhere, his entire being focused on the act of seeing. It made sense. He saw the world with an intensity that most people, blessed with sight, took for granted. "I lost a friend once," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming rougher. "A good man, because I was watching the horizon, and I didn't see the pressure plate of a mine just a few feet away from us. It was hidden in the dust, a slight discoloration, that's all. I missed it. I was looking, but I didn't see." The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and raw. It was a piece of his soul, offered up in the quiet of the garden. I understood then. His meticulous descriptions, his need to be my eyes, it wasn't just a job, it was an atonement. He was determined to never miss a detail again. He was protecting me not just from the world, but from the ghosts of his own past. "You see everything, Julian," I said softly, my fingers tightening on his arm. It was my turn to offer an anchor. "I try," he said. "For you, Serafina, I try." He had used my name, not Miss Rossi, Serafina. It sounded different in his mouth, not the name of a fragile curiosity, but the name of a woman he was trying to show the world. That evening my father requested my presence in his study. This was not unusual, but Julian's presence was. My father usually dismissed my security when we were in his inner sanctum, the most secure room in the house. Tonight, Julian stood quietly by the door as I sat in the leather chair opposite my father's enormous desk. The air was thick with the scent of old books, leather, and my father's cigar smoke. "Serafina," my father began, his voice its usual booming baritone, softened slightly for me. "We have an opportunity, a permanent truce with the Vitti family, the Vittis. Even I knew that name. They were our oldest, most bitter rivals. A truce sounded like a good thing." "That is good news, Father," I said. "It is," he agreed. "It will secure our future, end a generation of bloodshed. It requires a gesture of commitment, an alliance, a marriage." The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I knew, with a sickening certainty, what was coming next. "Marco Vitti has asked for your hand," my father declared, as if he were announcing a business acquisition. "It is a great honor. He is the eldest son. The union will make our families one. It will guarantee your safety for the rest of your life." My safety. He was offering to trade one cage for another, more permanent one. I had met Marco Vitti once, years ago, at a strained Christmas truce party. I remembered the damp, limp feel of his hand. I remembered the way he had spoken to my father, his voice slick with false deference, while ignoring me completely. "A dinner has been arranged for tomorrow night," my father continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil. "The Vitis will join us here. It will be a formality, an announcement." I felt a cold dread wash over me, a familiar wave of helplessness. My father had decided. The Rossi family required it. My opinion was irrelevant. I was a pawn, a porcelain doll to be traded. All the progress I had made, the small sparks of confidence Julian had been fanning into a flame, seemed to flicker and die. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The ghost was back, my voice stolen. My father took my silence for assent. "Good," he said, his voice full of satisfaction. "Rocco will see to your dress. You will be beautiful." He saw Rocco, not Julian. He still saw the old ways. As I stood to leave, my legs feeling unsteady, I reached out for Julian. My hand found his arm instantly. His muscles were tense, rigid. Through that single point of contact, I could feel his anger. It was a silent, coiled fury that radiated from him. He was a bodyguard. He was supposed to be neutral, but he wasn't. In that moment, he was not neutral at all, and in his silent, simmering rage, I found a tiny, desperate flicker of hope. The following evening, the house was suffocating. The air, usually just thick with silence, was now layered with tension. It had a new scent, a combination of expensive perfume, nervous sweat, and the aggressive aroma of the catering. My father was putting on a show. Julian had described the scene to me as he led me towards the formal dining room. Extra men, ours and theirs, stood like statues in the hallways, their suits unable to conceal the hard lines of the weapons beneath. The crystal and silver on the dining table had been polished to a blinding sheen. "It looks less like a dinner party," Julian had murmured, his voice a low growl near my ear, and more like a treaty signing between two warring nations who still have their fingers on the trigger. I wore a dress of deep blue silk. The maids had told me the color, but Julian had described it. "It is the color of the sky at twilight. Serafina," he'd said, his voice soft as he stood behind me in my room. That perfect, deep, velvety moment, just before the stars appear. His words had been a small gift of beauty in a night that felt increasingly ugly. Now, the silk felt cold against my skin. He stood behind my chair in the dining room, a silent, imposing statue. My father sat at the head of the table, exuding a heavy, patriarchal authority. Across from me sat Marco Vitti and his father, Antonio. I could smell Marco's cologne, a sharp, citrusy scent that was overpowering and unpleasant. It smelled arrogant. The small talk was excruciating. It was a dance of veiled threats and false pleasantries, a language of power I had grown up hearing but never participating in. I sat in silence, a prop for their negotiations. I could feel Marco's eyes on me. It wasn't a gaze of admiration. It was one of assessment, like a merchant inspecting goods. "She is even more beautiful than I remember," Marco said, his voice a slick, oily thing. He was speaking to my father, not to me. A true Rossi jewel. A bit of a shame about the condition, of course, but one cannot have everything, and she will be well cared for. A hot, sharp anger flared in my chest. The condition. He said it as if I were a damaged product with a minor flaw. I felt my hands clench into fists in my lap, the silk of my dress twisting under the pressure. I could feel Julian shift behind me. It was a minute movement, but I felt it through the floor, through the chair, a predator adjusting its stance. My father gave a magnanimous, dismissive wave of his hand. Her condition has kept her pure. She has been protected from the world. She is untouched. He spoke of me like a vintage wine, stored in a cellar, waiting to be uncorked. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning heat that spread up my neck and across my cheeks. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and throw my plate of untouched food across the table. But the years of conditioning, of being the quiet, docile, broken thing, held me in place. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thinning. "She is quiet," Marco observed with a smirk in his voice. "That is a fine quality in a wife." That was it. That was the line. Something inside me, a cord that had been stretched taut for 22 years, finally snapped. The voice that came out of me was not the thin, reedy whisper of the ghost. It was low and clear and vibrated with a cold fury I didn't know I possessed. "I am quiet, Mr. Vitti," I said, my head lifting, my face turned directly toward the source of his arrogant scent, because I have not heard anything worth responding to. The silence that fell over the table was no longer just the absence of sound. It was a tangible shock wave. I could hear Antonio Vitti draw in a sharp breath. I could feel my father's stunned stillness. I had spoken out of turn. I had spoken at all. Marco laughed. A short, ugly bark. "It has a voice. How charming. Do not worry, little dove. I will teach you when it is appropriate to use it." Before I could even process the insult, Julian acted. I didn't see it, but I heard it. The scrape of a chair, a swift, heavy movement, and then a choked gasp from Marco. "You will address Miss Rossi with respect." Julian's voice was deadly calm, a blade of ice in the heated room. "Or you will not address her at all." "Julian, stand down," my father roared, his voice a thunderclap. I heard a low growl from Julian, the sound of a leashed wolf straining against its chain. There was another sound, a slight groan of pain from Marco. "Get your man off my son," Antonio Vitti shouted, his chair scraping back. I reached back, my hand searching frantically. My fingers brushed against the hard muscle of Julian's thigh. He was leaning over the table, his body a rigid line of aggression. "Julian," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please." I felt the tension in him hold for another beat, a heart-stopping moment of pure defiance. Then, with a slow, deliberate release, he stepped back. I heard Marco suck in a ragged breath. "My apologies," Julian said, his voice devoid of any actual apology. My hand slipped. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it was almost magnificent. I had no idea what he had done, but I could imagine it: a hand on the throat, a grip on the arm, a quick, painful application of pressure, a clear, unmistakable message. "This is an outrage, Alessandro," Antonio Vitti sputtered. "Your hired help lays hands on my son at your own table." "He is overzealous in his duties," my father said, his voice tight with fury, but also a grudging uncertainty. He was angry at the breach of protocol, but a part of him, the part that valued strength and loyalty above all else, must have been impressed. "Julian, You are dismissed. Rocco will take over. No, I said, the word falling into the charged silence. All heads, I assumed, turned to me. He stays. My father's voice was dangerously low. Serafina, this does not concern you. It concerns me completely, I said, my newfound strength surging. This man, I gestured vaguely toward Marco, speaks of me as if I am an object. He insults me in my own home. Julian was defending my honor, father. Something you seemed content to let be trampled for the sake of your truce. If he leaves, I leave. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. The movement was clumsy, uncertain, but I was on my feet. I was no longer a prop. I reached back, and my hand found Julian's instantly. His fingers closed around mine, his grip firm and reassuring. He was there. He had not left. My father was speechless. I had never defied him, not once in my entire life. I was his porcelain doll, and the doll had just stood up and walked off the shelf. This is madness, Antonio Vitti said with disgust. The girl is out of control. The girl has a name. I shot back, turning my face toward his voice. And she has made her decision. I will not marry your son. I would rather live in a real prison than in the one he would build for me. With Julian's hand holding mine, I turned and walked away from the table. I did not know the path, but I trusted him to guide me. We walked out of the dining room, leaving a tableau of stunned and furious men in our wake. We crossed the echoing foyer, the sound of our footsteps, the only noise in the house. He led me up the grand staircase, past the spot where he'd told me rainbows danced on the walls. He didn't take me to my room. He took me to his. It was a small, Spartan space at the end of the hall, a room for staff. It smelled only of him, that clean soap and cotton scent. It was the safest I had felt in my entire life. What have I done? I whispered, sinking onto the edge of his simple bed. The reality of my actions crashed down on me. I had defied my father. I had shattered a truce. I had, in all likelihood, started a war. You found your voice, Julian said, his voice soft, all the ice gone, replaced with a deep, rumbling warmth. He knelt in front of me, taking both of my hands in his. His were large and calloused, a map of a life lived, a stark contrast to my own soft, useless hands. You stood up for yourself, Serafina. That is what you have done. My father, I will deal with your father, he said with absolute certainty. And I will deal with the Vitus. No one will ever speak to you like that again. I swear it. I lifted a hand, my fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. He was real. This feeling, this strange, terrifying courage was real. He had been hired to be my eyes, to show me the world, but he had done so much more. He had taught me to see myself. And now, he was prepared to stand between me and the consequences. The personal threat of Marco Vitti was gone, but in its place, a much larger, more dangerous one loomed. And Julian was placing himself at the center of it. The aftermath of my defiance was a storm contained within the walls of the house. My father did not summon me. He did not yell. He retreated into a cold, dangerous silence that was more terrifying than any outburst. The house became a fortress. Julian confirmed that the Vitti family had left in a fury, their cars tearing down the long gravel driveway. The truce was not just broken, it was incinerated. He's angry, I said to Julian. We were in the library, a room I had always loved for its scent of aging paper and leather. I sat in a deep wingback chair, while Julian stood by the window, a sentinel watching over a silent, sun-drenched lawn. He is... Julian agreed. But he is also confused. You are not behaving according to his expectations. You have become an unknown quantity. In his world, the unknown is dangerous, but it is also respected. He will fire you, I said, the thought a cold knot of dread in my stomach. He will send you away. He can try, Julian replied, and the simple finality of his words sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't arrogance. It was a statement of fact. He would not go. Serafina, your father and I need to have a conversation. But first, I need you to understand something. The threat from the Vitus is real now. They were insulted publicly. Their pride will demand retribution. You are the reason for that insult. That makes you their primary target. The abstract idea of a mafia war suddenly became terrifyingly concrete. It wasn't about business territories or shipments anymore. It was about me. So I have made things worse, I whispered, my momentary courage curdling into fear. No, he said, turning from the window. He crossed the room in a few strides and knelt before my chair again, just as he had in his room. He took my hands. You have made things honest. You chose not to live a lie. There is no worse than that. The mansion, which you saw as a cage, is now the safest place for you to be. I can protect you here. Your father's power, which has suffocated you, is now what will keep you alive. Do you see? I did. The gilded cage had transformed into a necessary fortress. The irony was bitter, but the logic was inescapable. My desire to be free had, for the moment, locked me in more securely than ever before, but the nature of my confinement had changed. Before, I was a prisoner of my father's fear and my own helplessness. Now, I was a principal in a conflict, protected by a man who saw me as a person worth fighting for. Later that day, Julian sought out my father. He insisted I be there. We met in the study, the same room where my fate had been decided for me just a day before. The atmosphere was thick with cigar smoke and unspoken resentment. I sat in the chair, and Julian stood beside me, his hand resting on the back of the chair, a subtle but undeniable gesture of solidarity. You have overstepped your position, my father began, his voice a low rumble. He was speaking to Julian, but his cold gaze was fixed on a point in the distance. My position is to protect your daughter, Julian countered, his voice level. That includes protecting her from a miserable life bound to a man who disrespects her. You know nothing of our ways, my father thundered, slamming his hand on the desk. The sound made me jump, but Julian's hand on my chair was a steadying weight. That alliance would have guaranteed the security of this family for a generation. It would have guaranteed her safety. Her safety at the cost of her spirit? Julian shot back. You have kept her in this house, wrapped in cotton wool, convinced that she is fragile. You have smothered her. But she is not fragile. She is the strongest person in this house. You have just never bothered to look. Look? My father laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. What good is looking? The boy has a point, Julian. How can I look when she cannot see? Her blindness is a weakness. Our enemies know it. I have spent her whole life trying to build walls high enough to protect her from that. It was the first time he had ever said it so plainly. The truth of his motivation, the fear that drove his suffocating protection. It was not malice. It was a deep, misguided, terrified love. Before Julian could respond, I spoke. You are wrong, Father. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room. I stood up, my hands gripping the back of the chair for support. My blindness is not a weakness. It is a fact. It is the lens through which I experience the world. My weakness was believing that it made me lesser. My weakness was allowing you and everyone else to treat me like a broken object. But I am not broken. I took a hesitant step forward, away from the safety of Julian's presence. I was navigating on my own. Julian has taught me that. He didn't try to fix me. He just showed me what was already there. He described the color of a dress, the shape of a bee, the way light dances on a wall. He gave me words, and I built the world for myself. He taught me how to defend myself. Defend herself? My father scoffed. With what? Harsh words? With this, Julian said. He moved to stand in front of me. Turn your back to me, Serafina. Treat me as an attacker. My heart pounded. This was one of the lessons. We had practiced it in the empty ballroom, using hearing and instinct. I turned, presenting my back to him, my senses on high alert. I listened to the whisper of his clothes, the subtle shift of his weight on the Persian rug. I waited. I felt a hand grab my shoulder. I didn't think. I reacted. I dropped my weight, twisting my body as he had taught me, using his momentum against him. I brought my elbow back sharply, aiming for the place I knew his ribs would be. I stomped my heel down on where I calculated his foot should be. My elbow made contact with something solid, and I heard a soft oof of breath. My heel found its mark. I spun around, my hands up in a warty, defensive posture, my body thrumming with adrenaline. There was a stunned silence. She is faster than most of my men who can see, Julian said, his voice laced with pride. He didn't sound hurt, just impressed. She uses her hearing. She feels the vibration through the floor. She anticipates. Her other senses are so finely tuned that they are their own form of sight. You see her as blind, Alessandro. I see her as aware. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hands still raised. I had struck Julian. I had defended myself against the man who was my protector, and I had succeeded. A wave of exhilaration, sharp and bright, washed away my fear. My father was silent for a long time. I heard him stand and walk around his desk. I felt his presence before me, smelling the familiar scent of his cigars and his expensive cologne. A hand, his hand, large and heavy, came to rest on my shoulder. It was gentle. "You have fire, daughter," he said, his voice thick with a strange new emotion. It sounded like awe, like your mother. He cleared his throat. "The Viti alliance is dead. You were right to refuse him. No daughter of mine will be married to a man who does not respect the fire in her blood." He had relented. He had seen me, truly seen me, for the first time. The victory was so immense, so overwhelming, that my knees felt weak. Julian's hand was suddenly on my arm, steadying me. "But this means war," my father said, his voice turning hard and practical again. "The Vitus will not let this go. They will come for us, and they will come for her." He turned his attention back to Julian. "You say you can protect her. Now you will prove it. You are no longer just her bodyguard. You are in charge of all security for this estate. Rocco will answer to you. My family's survival is now your responsibility. Do you accept?" "I accept," Julian said without hesitation. The personal threat of Marco Viti had been resolved not by force, but by my own voice. But in doing so, we had unleashed a far greater external threat. The battle for my freedom of choice was won. The war for our survival was just beginning. The days that followed were a symphony of tense preparation, a quiet hum of deadly intent that settled over the estate. I experienced it not through sight, but through sound and sensation. The crunch of gravel under the tires of new vehicles arriving, the clipped, professional voices of men I didn't know, the scent of gun oil that now faintly mingled with the smell of lilies in the hallways. The house was no longer a home. It was a command center, and Julian was its commander. He was a different man. The gentle teacher who described roses and rainbows was still there in the quiet moments he stole to be with me, but for the most part, he was the soldier he once was. His voice on the phone or speaking to the other men was sharp, decisive, and radiated an authority that no one, not even Rocco, questioned. My father had ceded control of our defense, a move of trust so profound in his world that it was the equivalent of abdication. Julian made sure I was never alone, but his protection felt different now. It was less about shielding me and more about empowering me. We continued our self-defense lessons, but they were more intense, more focused. They will see your blindness as the ultimate vulnerability, he said one afternoon in the empty ballroom, our footsteps echoing on the polished floor. They will assume you are helpless. That is our advantage. They will not expect you to fight back. I want you to be the most unexpected thing they have ever encountered. He taught me how to use my cane not as a tool for guidance, but as a weapon. He taught me to identify the number of people in a room by the subtle acoustics of their breathing, the whisper of their clothing. He honed my senses into weapons, turning my perceived weakness into a formidable strength. My fear did not vanish, but it changed. It was no longer the passive, helpless dread of a victim. It was the sharp, focused alertness of a survivor. One night, the tension finally broke. I was in my room, trying to read a book in Braille, but the words felt like meaningless bumps under my fingers. My focus was entirely on the sounds of the house. The silence was too deep. It was the held breath before a plunge. My door opened without a knock. It was Julian. "I need you to come with me," he said, his voice tight. "And I need you to be very quiet." I didn't question him. I took his offered hand, and he led me out of my room, not toward the main staircase, but down a service corridor I barely knew existed. The air was colder here, the floor bare concrete. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "To the panic room. Your father is already there." He said it calmly, but I could feel the vibrating tension in his arm. "We have incoming." Incoming! The word was so sterile, so military. It meant cars on the driveway that shouldn't be there. It meant the war had come to our door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He led me through a series of turns and down a short flight of stairs. The air grew colder, smelling of damp earth and steel. He stopped before what felt like a heavy metal door. I heard the beep and click of an electronic lock. The door swung inward with a heavy hiss. "Get inside," he said, gently pushing me forward. "Stay with your father. Do not open this door for any reason until I come for you myself. Do you understand? You're not staying?" I asked, my voice trembling as I clutched his jacket. "My place is out there," he said, his hand briefly touching my cheek. The calloused skin was a fleeting, rough comfort. "I have to lead my men. I have to protect this house. I have to protect you. I will come back for you, Serafina. I promise." He gave me one last, gentle push into the room and pulled the door shut. The hiss and heavy clank of the bolts sliding into place was the most final sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of being buried alive. The room was small and smelled of sterilized air. I felt my father's presence nearby. He took my hand, his own trembling slightly. For the first time in my life, I think, my father was scared, and I was the one who felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. Julian had promised he would be back. I chose to believe him. The next hour, was an eternity of auditory torture. The room was soundproofed, but it could not completely eliminate the deep, percussive thuds that vibrated through the concrete floor. Gunfire. I had never heard it in real life, only in movies. It was nothing like the movies. It was a brutal, ugly sound, a series of violent coughs that spoke of nothing but destruction. There were other sounds, too, the distant shatter of glass, a muffled shout, once a sickeningly heavy thud against the wall somewhere far above us. I sat on a small bench, my hands clenched together, my entire being focused on the vibrations in the floor, trying to decipher the story of the battle happening just outside our steel cocoon. I tried to picture Julian, not as my gentle teacher, but as the soldier he was, moving through the chaos, seeing everything, anticipating every threat. I prayed that his past failure was not a prophecy. And then, as suddenly as it began, the silence returned. It was a different kind of silence now. It was not peaceful. It was the silence of a graveyard. It was heavy with what had just happened. We waited. Every second stretched into a minute, every minute into an hour. My father paced the small room, a caged lion. I remained seated, my senses strained, listening for one specific set of footsteps. Finally, I heard it, the beep of the keypad. My breath hitched. The bolts slid back with a loud clank. The door hissed open. The air that rushed in was thick with the acrid smell of cordite and something else, something metallic and coppery. Blood. "It is over," Julian said. His voice was ragged, exhausted. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and moved toward the sound of his voice. My hands reached out and found him. He was leaning against the doorframe, and as my fingers brushed his chest, they came away wet. "You're hurt," I whispered, my voice tight with panic. "It is nothing," he rasped. "Just a scratch." I didn't need my eyes to know he was lying. My hands moved with a frantic urgency, exploring, assessing. His jacket was torn near his shoulder. The fabric was soaked through with warm, sticky blood. My fingers traced the path of the wound, a deep gash along his upper arm and shoulder. Another cut was on his cheek, shallow but bleeding freely. "This is not a scratch," I said, my voice shaking. "Father, we need the medical kit. Now." My father, who had been frozen in the doorway, surveying the damage to his home, was jolted into action by the command in my voice. For the first time, I was the one giving the orders. Julian tried to protest, but I pushed him gently toward a chair in the hallway. "Sit. Do not argue with me." He sank into the chair with a low groan, his body finally admitting the pain he had been denying. I knelt before him, my hands moving with a sureness that surprised me. In this moment of chaos, with the smell of battle thick in the air, I was not the blind girl. I was not the protected doll. I was a caregiver. My heightened sense of touch, which had learned to read the texture of flower petals, was now reading the extent of his injuries. My hands, which he had taught to be weapons, were now tools of healing. My father returned with the kit, and I worked quickly, my fingers finding antiseptic wipes, gauze, and bandages. I cleaned the cut on his cheek first, my touch as gentle as I could make it. He flinched but didn't pull away. "Marco Vitti is dead," Julian said, his voice low and hoarse. "He led the assault himself. He thought he could take the house, take you. He was wrong. He had resolved the external threat. He had met the Vitti's war with his own and had won. But the victory had come at a cost I could feel, wet and warm, under my fingertips as I began to clean the deep gash on his arm. He hissed in pain as the antiseptic made contact with the raw flesh. "I am sorry," I murmured, my hands faltering for a second. "Do not be," he said, his own hand coming up to cover mine, stilling their trembling. "You are saving my life, Serafina." I wasn't. He was exaggerating. But in that moment, in the smoky, blood-scented hallway of the ravaged mansion, the roles had completely reversed. He, the strong protector, was wounded and vulnerable, and I, the fragile ward, was the one tending to him, my world of darkness giving me a focus and a steadiness that light might have stolen. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. My hands were on his body, feeling the heat of his skin, the tremor of his muscles, the steady beat of his heart. I was aware of nothing else, but the man in front of me, the man who had walked into my silent world and filled it with color, and who had just bled to keep it safe. With the immediate threats neutralized, a profound and heavy quiet settled over the house. It was the quiet of exhaustion, of aftermath. The bodies had been removed, the broken glass swept away, but the scent of violence lingered like a ghost. My father was occupied with the grim business of politics and power, dealing with the fallout of a rival family's decimation. It left Julian and me in a strange, isolated bubble. He was confined to his room for 2 days on my father's strict orders and mine. The gash in his arm was deep, and though it wasn't life-threatening, it needed rest to heal. The cut on his cheek was stitched, a dark line against his skin. I became his self-appointed nurse. The reversal of our roles, which had begun in that chaotic hallway, solidified into a new dynamic. I brought him his meals, navigating the house with a new confidence born of purpose. I changed his bandages, my fingers now familiar with the landscape of his injury. My blindness, once a source of frustration, became an asset. I didn't need to see the wound to know if it was inflamed. I could feel the heat. I didn't need to see his face to know he was in pain. I could hear it in the subtle shifts of his breathing. On the third afternoon, I found him standing by the window of his room, staring out at the gardens. He was supposed to be in bed. "You are supposed to be resting," I said, my voice a soft reprimand as I set a tray with a glass of water and his medication on the bedside table. "I am tired of resting," he said. His voice was stronger now, less ragged. "I am not a good patient." "No, you are not," I agreed, a small smile touching my lips. I walked to stand beside him, near the window. A warm breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of cut grass and roses. "What do you see?" It was our old game, but the context had changed everything. He was silent for a moment, and I felt him turn his head to look at me. "I see the gardeners repairing the lawn, where the cars tore it up," he said, his voice low. "I see a patch of trampled marigolds. I see the world trying to heal itself. And I see you. You cannot see me," I said softly. "I am standing right next to you. I see you," he repeated, his voice firm with conviction. "I see your strength. I see the courage you showed at that dinner table. I see the woman who took command in a hallway full of chaos and stitched up a soldier without flinching. That is what I see." His words were a warm current, flowing through me and chasing away the last of my own fear. He didn't see the blind girl. He saw a queen. "You are the one who showed me she was there," I whispered, turning my face toward him. I felt his hand come up, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was hesitant, completely different from the confident grip of the bodyguard or the efficient movements of the soldier. This was Julian, just Julian. His thumb brushed against my lower lip, and a jolt, sharp and sweet, went through me. "Serafina," he breathed, and my name was a prayer on his lips. I leaned into his touch, a silent invitation, a surrender. The space between us dissolved. I felt the soft scratch of his stubble against my skin, the warmth of his breath, and then his lips were on mine. The kiss was not what I would have expected. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate relief. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly gentle. It was a question and an answer, a promise and a confession all at once. It tasted of sunlight and safety and a future I had never dared to imagine. It was a perfect, beautiful thing in a world that had so recently been filled with ugliness. In that kiss, I saw more than I ever had in my life. I saw colors I had no names for, felt light I had never known. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine. The stitches on his cheek were a rough texture against my temple. I think I have been falling in love with you since the moment I heard you test me about the creaking floorboard, he murmured. A laugh, genuine and bubbling, escaped me. And I replied, my hands coming up to frame his face, to learn its topography by heart. I have been falling for you since you told me about the rainbows on the wall. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in the quiet of the room, the world outside healing, and the world between us changing forever. The threats were gone, the cages were broken. All that was left was this fragile, powerful, beautiful new beginning. Later that evening, my father summoned us both to his study. The air was clear of cigar smoke for once. He looked tired, older than I had ever known him to be. He stood before the large window, looking out into the encroaching darkness. The Vidi organization is in shambles, he said without turning around. They have no leadership. They will not be a threat to us again. He had won his war, but his voice held no triumph. He turned to face us. His eyes, I imagined, moved from me to Julian and back again. He looked at my hand, which was held firmly in Julian's. He did not comment on it. The danger is over, Serafina, he said, his voice heavy. You are safe now. Truly safe. He paused, taking a deep breath. Julian has fulfilled his duty and far exceeded it. I owe him a debt I can never repay. He looked at Julian. I will give you anything you want. A new position, any territory you wish to run. Name it. That is not what I want, Julian said simply. My father nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. He turned his gaze back to me. And you, daughter? You are free. You have proven you are not the child I thought you were. I was wrong to keep you hidden, wrong to try and arrange your life. The admission was clearly difficult for him, a lifetime of patriarchal certainty crumbling. He walked to his desk and opened a drawer. I can set you up anywhere you want to go. A house, a trust fund that will ensure you and your children never want for anything. You will be completely independent. You will never have to see this house or this life again, if that is your choice. He was offering me an escape, a clean break, a different kind of freedom than the one I had found with Julian. Then he looked at Julian. Or, you can stay here with him. He did not say, as his wife, or as his partner. He left it undefined. The choice was mine, and mine alone. A true choice, with no hidden conditions or expectations. I could take the safe, sterile independence he offered, a life far away from the violence and fear. Or I could choose this man and the complicated, dangerous world that came with him. I squeezed Julian's hand. The choice wasn't a choice at all. A life without him would be a return to silence, no matter how far away I went. He was the one who had filled my world with sound and color and meaning. "I am already home, Father," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I am staying." I felt Julian's hand tighten around mine, a silent affirmation. I couldn't see my father's face, but I heard the long, slow breath he let out. It was the sound of acceptance, the sound of a father letting his daughter go, even though she was staying right beside him. I had made my conscious choice. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances, nor a pawn in my father's games. I was a woman choosing her own life and her own love. A week later, Julian came to my room just as dawn was breaking. I knew it was dawn because he had taught me its scent, the cool, damp smell of dew on the grass, the fresh, clean aroma of the air washed new by night. "I want to take you somewhere," he said, his voice soft. He didn't wait for an answer, just took my hand, his touch now as familiar to me as my own skin. We didn't take one of the black sedans that were my father's signature. Instead, I heard the low, throaty rumble of a different kind of engine. Julian helped me into the passenger seat of what he described as an old, restored convertible. The leather seats were worn and soft, smelling of sun and age. With the top down, the morning air rushed over me as we drove, a heady, liberating sensation. It was the first time I had felt the wind in my hair like that, unrestrained, wild. We drove for over an hour, leaving the manicured suburbs of my father's world behind. The air changed, growing heavy and salty. I could hear a new sound, a vast, rhythmic roaring and hissing that grew steadily louder. "The ocean," I breathed, my heart quickening with anticipation. I had read about it, heard it in recordings, but I had never been. It was deemed too public, too uncontrollable, too dangerous. Julian parked the car and led me from the pavement onto a new surface. Sand. It shifted and slid under my shoes, a soft, unstable foundation that was oddly thrilling. The roar of the waves was immense now, a living, breathing entity. The air was so thick with salt, I could taste it on my lips. "Take off your shoes," he said. I did, and the sand was cool and fine between my toes. He led me forward, toward the sound. The roar grew louder, and then I felt it, a cold, foamy rush of water over my feet. I gasped, laughing at the shock and the delight of it. The water receded, pulling at my ankles, a playful, powerful tug. "This is the Atlantic," Julian said, his voice close to my ear, having to speak up over the crashing waves. "It stretches for thousands of miles, all the way to Europe. The water is a deep, churning blue-gray today, under a sky that is the color of a pale pearl. The waves are building far out, rising up like moving hills of water. Then they curl over, their tops turning to white foam, and they crash down onto the shore in a line of white that stretches as far as you can see in either direction." I held onto his arm, my other hand outstretched as if I could touch the pearl-colored sky, the moving hills of water. He was giving me the ocean, a gift of immense, untamed beauty. He then did something I didn't expect. He let go of my hand and knelt in the wet sand before me. The waves rushed in again, swirling around his knees. "Serafina," he began, his voice serious, yet full of that deep warmth that was his alone. "I am not a man of wealth or power like your father. I cannot give you a palace or an empire. What I have is my loyalty, my strength, and my eyes, and they are all yours, for as long as you will have them." My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. The sound of the ocean was a symphony around us. He took my hand, and I felt the cool slip of metal onto my finger. It wasn't a large, ostentatious diamond, the kind my father would have chosen. It was a simple, smooth band. It felt solid, real. I cannot promise you a life without danger, he continued. Your name and my past will likely always draw shadows, but I can promise you that I will stand between you and every one of them. I promise I will spend the rest of my life showing you the world, describing every sunrise and every painting and every blade of grass. I promise to be your eyes, your shield, and your partner in everything. He paused. And in return, you can show me how to truly see it. You already have. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of a joy so profound it was painful. This was not a proposal born of strategy or alliance. It was a promise, a commitment of two souls, one who saw the world and one who felt it, coming together to make a whole. Yes, I whispered, the words stolen by the wind and the waves. I knelt in the sand and the water in front of him, my dress forgotten, and threw my arms around his neck. Yes, Julian. Always. He held me tightly, and we stayed there for a long time, two small figures against the vastness of the ocean, the cool water swirling around us, the simple, solid band on my finger, a silent testament to the commitment we had just made. My father had offered me a life of sterile safety. Julian was offering me a life, a real one, full of color and texture and danger and breathtaking beauty. The final resolution was not a grand affair. It was a quiet departure. My father, in the greatest act of love he had ever shown me, helped us leave. He understood that for me to be truly free, I could not live in the shadow of his fortress. He gave us his blessing and a new life. Months later, I stood on a small wooden porch that smelled of cedar and sea salt. The house was not a mansion. Julian described it as a small, weathered cottage painted a cheerful blue, nestled in a quiet cove hundreds of miles from the world I had left behind. Our world. Here, the only crashing was the sound of the waves. The only tension was the pull of the tide. I had learned the geography of this small piece of the world by heart. I could walk from the porch, down 3 wooden steps, and onto a path of crushed shells that led to our own private stretch of beach. I could do it with my cane, my steps confident, my senses alive to the cry of the gulls and the whisper of the wind in the dune grass. Julian came up behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. He was a warm, solid presence, my constant north. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was listening to the world," I replied, leaning back against his chest. "It sounds like peace." He was silent for a moment, his arms holding me a little tighter. "Your father called," he said softly. "He sends his love, and he wanted me to tell you. He started taking painting lessons." A surprised laugh escaped me. My father, Alessandro Rossi, the shark, learning to paint. The image was so absurd, so wonderful, it filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the Sunday. Perhaps he was finally learning to see the world too. "And what do you see today, Julian?" I asked, my hand covering his on my waist. He pressed a kiss to my temple. "I see a blue sky with a few wispy, white clouds that look like stretched out cotton. I see a pod of dolphins, their fins breaking the surface of the water far out in the bay. And I see my wife, standing on the porch of our home, looking more beautiful than any sunrise." I smiled, turning my face up toward the sun, feeling its warmth on my skin. He had given me the world. He had taught me to see, not with my eyes, but with my heart. I was no longer the feared mafia boss's blind daughter, a creature of rumor and shadow. I was Serafina, a woman who had been lost in the quiet and found in the color of a man's words. And for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of what the future held. I was home. I was loved. I was free.